in the sterile hallways of Metropolitan General Hospital, where beeping monitors and squeaking shoes created their own kind of symphony. One night shift in December 2019 was about to become a turning point that neither Sarah, a veteran nurse of 15 years, nor her patient, Michael, could have anticipated. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows as Sarah hurried through her rounds, her mind already racing through the dozen tasks still waiting on her list. She paused outside room 412, taking a deep breath before entering. Inside lay a 67-year-old man who had been admitted 3 days ago with severe pneumonia. Their first interaction hadn't gone smoothly. Michael had been distant, almost suspicious, his eyes following her every move as she checked his vitals. She had seen that look before, the weight of decades of healthcare disparities and historical trauma reflected in his guarded expression. But Sarah wasn't one to let barriers stand in her way. As she went about her duties that night, she noticed the worn photograph on Michael's bedside table, a black and white image of a woman in a nurse's uniform from what appeared to be the 1960s. When she asked about it, Michael's face softened for the first time. "That's my mother," he said quietly. She wanted to be a nurse too, but back then, his voice trailed off, but Sarah understood. Something shifted in that moment. Between checking vital signs and adjusting IV drips, Sarah began sharing stories from her own journey in nursing. Michael opened up about his mother's struggles, her dreams, and how she ultimately became a caregiver in her community despite the doors that remained closed to her. Their conversation stretched beyond the usual patient-nurse exchanges, touching on family, dreams, and the changes they'd both witnessed over the years. What Sarah didn't realize was that her simple acts of genuine care, spending extra minutes listening to his stories, bringing him his favorite tea, or just sitting beside him during her breaks, were slowly dismantling walls built over decades of distrust. But it wasn't just Michael who was changing. Each conversation helped Sarah understand perspectives she had never fully grasped before, despite her years of experience. As Michael's condition improved, their unlikely friendship deepened. Other staff members noticed the transformation. The previously withdrawn patient now greeted everyone with a warm smile, and his recovery was progressing faster than expected. But it wasn't until Sarah overheard a conversation between Michael and his daughter that she understood the true impact of their connection. "This place is different," Michael told his daughter, his voice thick with emotion. "That nurse, Sarah, she reminds me of what your grandmother always said about healthcare, that sometimes the best medicine isn't in the pills or treatments, but in being seen as a person, not just a patient." Yet this story was far from over. As Michael prepared for discharge, neither he nor Sarah could have predicted how their chance encounter would ripple out into their community, challenging long-held beliefs and inspiring changes that would touch countless lives. What began as a simple interaction between a nurse and her patient was about to evolve into something much bigger than either of them could have imagined. The real question wasn't just about how one nurse's kindness changed a patient's life. It was about how that change would multiply, spreading through families, communities, and generations to come. But to understand that part of the story, we need to go back to what happened on that final day at Metropolitan General, when Sarah made a decision that would alter both their lives forever. On Michael's last day at the hospital, Sarah walked into his room with his discharge papers, only to find him sitting on the edge of his bed, staring intently at an open laptop. His daughter had helped him set up a video call with his church's community outreach program, where he'd been a dedicated volunteer for over 2 decades. Despite his illness, Michael hadn't missed a single weekly meeting, even if it meant attending virtually from his hospital bed. Sarah paused in the doorway, not wanting to interrupt, but what she overheard made her heart sink. The community center where they provided free health screenings was being shut down due to lack of funding. The elderly residents in their neighborhood would have nowhere else to go for basic health checks and medical advice. Michael's voice trembled as he described how many of their regular visitors were people who didn't trust traditional healthcare settings, people who reminded him of himself just a few weeks ago. Without thinking twice, Sarah stepped into the room. "I might have an idea," she said, surprising herself as much as Michael. During their many conversations, she had shared her dream of starting a mobile health clinic, something that could bring health care directly to underserved communities. It was a plan she'd been developing in her spare time, but between her shifts and family responsibilities, it had remained just that, a plan. Michael's eyes lit up as Sarah explained her vision. She had the medical expertise and certifications, while he had deep connections within the community and decades of experience in building trust with people who had every reason to be skeptical. Together, they realized they might be able to create something extraordinary. But the path ahead wasn't simple. Sarah knew the challenges they'd face: securing funding, navigating regulations, convincing both the hospital administration and the community that this partnership could work. And then there was the bigger question: could their individual experience of bridging the racial divide translate into a larger initiative that would help heal decades of systemic distrust? As they discussed possibilities, Michael's daughter, Lisa, arrived. A successful business consultant, she listened to their conversation with growing interest. "You know," she said, pulling up a chair, "this reminds me of a similar project in Atlanta that received federal funding last year. Maybe we could learn from their model." The energy in the room was electric as they began mapping out possibilities on the back of Michael's discharge papers. Sarah's medical colleagues began poking their heads in, drawn by the animated discussion. Dr. Thompson, the chief of internal medicine, lingered in the doorway, his interest piqued by talks of community outreach and preventive care programs. What had started as a simple discharge meeting was transforming into an impromptu planning session for something much bigger. But as the excitement built, Sarah couldn't help but notice the clock ticking toward the end of her shift. She had another full day ahead of her, and Michael had a family waiting to take him home. Yet neither seemed ready to end this conversation. Just then, Michael's wife arrived with their grandson in tow. The 5-year-old ran straight to Sarah, wrapping his arms around her legs. He'd gotten to know her during his visits to Grandpa. As Sarah watched 3 generations of this family interact, she realized that what they were planning wasn't just about health care. It was about building bridges between communities, about creating lasting change that would benefit generations to come. But there was still one crucial piece missing from their plan, something that would either make or break their entire initiative. As Michael's family helped him gather his belongings, Sarah received an urgent page that would present them with an unexpected opportunity, one that would test their newfound partnership in ways they never imagined. The urgent page Sarah received that day was from the hospital board. They were holding an emergency meeting about budget cuts, and the community outreach programs were first on the chopping block. Her heart racing, Sarah realized this could either destroy their dreams before they began or become the perfect opportunity to present their innovative solution. With only 40 minutes to prepare, Sarah and Michael's family rushed to gather their hastily scribbled notes. Lisa, with her business background, quickly transformed their ideas into a rough presentation on her tablet. Michael, despite being officially discharged, insisted on staying. "Some things are worth being a little late for," he said, straightening his jacket with determination. The boardroom was packed with administrators, department heads, and financial officers when Sarah walked in. She felt out of place in her nursing scrubs among the suits and ties, but then she saw Michael wheeling himself in behind her, his family following close behind. The board members exchanged confused glances. This wasn't typical protocol for a budget meeting. Sarah's hands trembled as she began presenting their vision for a community-based healthcare initiative. She shared stories from her 15 years of nursing experience, highlighting the gaps in healthcare access she'd witnessed. But it was when Michael took over, speaking about his own transformation from a distrustful patient to a healthcare advocate, that the room fell completely silent. The tension mounted as the financial officers began throwing out challenging questions about costs and liability. Just when it seemed like they were losing ground, Lisa stepped in with market research she pulled up during their preparation, showing how similar programs had actually saved money by preventing expensive emergency room visits. But the real turning point came from an unexpected source. Michael's grandson, who had been quietly coloring in the corner, suddenly walked up to the hospital's CEO. He handed her a drawing he'd made, a picture of his grandpa in a hospital bed, with Sarah standing nearby, both of them smiling. The simple gesture cut through the corporate atmosphere, reminding everyone that, at its core, Healthcare was about human connections. The CEO studied the drawing for a long moment, then looked up at the financial projections on the screen. The room held its breath as she opened her mouth to speak, but before she could deliver her verdict, an urgent commotion erupted in the hallway. Through the boardroom's glass walls, they could see medical staff rushing past. Dr. Thompson burst into the room, his face grave. "There's been a major accident on the highway," he announced. "Multiple casualties coming in. We need all hands on deck." He paused, looking at the gathered group with sudden interest. "And we're about to see firsthand exactly why we need better community healthcare integration." Sarah and Michael exchanged glances. This crisis could either derail their proposal completely or prove exactly why their program was so desperately needed. As Sarah stood to follow Dr. Thompson, she felt Michael grasp her hand. "This is it," he whispered. "This is our chance to show them what we've been talking about." The next few hours would test not just their medical response capabilities, but the very principles of trust, community, and innovation they'd been advocating for. As Sarah rushed toward the emergency department, with Michael insisting on staying to help coordinate with arriving family members, neither of them could have predicted how this crisis would transform their vision in ways they never imagined. As ambulances began arriving at Metropolitan General, the true scope of the crisis became clear. The accident had occurred near the community center that was about to be shut down, and many of the victims were local residents heading home from a neighborhood health awareness meeting. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The very people they'd been trying to help were now flooding their emergency room. Sarah found herself treating an elderly woman who refused to let the doctors touch her, speaking rapidly in Spanish and growing more agitated by the second. Just as the situation was about to escalate, Michael wheeled himself over. Through their conversations, he had learned that Sarah spoke basic Spanish, a skill she picked up from her grandmother. Together, they managed to calm the woman down, learning that she was a regular at the community center's health screenings and had been heading home from protesting its closure when the accident occurred. The emergency room transformed into a microcosm of their community's healthcare challenges. Language barriers, cultural misunderstandings, and deep-seated mistrust of medical institutions all played out in real time. But something extraordinary was happening too. Michael, despite being a patient himself just hours ago, had become an impromptu liaison between the medical staff and the community members. Then came the news that would change everything. The accident had damaged the community center building itself, a cruel twist of fate that seemed to seal its fate. But as Sarah watched Michael coordinate with families, helping bridge the gap between medical staff and patients, she had an idea that made her heart race. What if they could turn this tragedy into an opportunity? During a brief moment of calm, Sarah pulled Lisa aside. "The building's damaged," she said, "but what if that's not the end? What if it's a beginning?" Lisa's eyes widened as she caught on to Sarah's thinking. The insurance payout for the building damage could potentially fund something new, something that combined the community center's trusted presence with proper medical facilities. But just as they were developing this new plan, Dr. Thompson approached with news that made everyone freeze. The hospital board had reconvened an emergency session, and they were questioning the liability of having Michael, a recently discharged patient, involved in emergency response. The same administrators who had been considering their community health care proposal were now viewing their unconventional approach as a potential risk. Sarah felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. Everything they'd worked for seemed to be unraveling. The very thing that made their approach special, the human connection, the trust, the breaking down of barriers, was being seen as a liability rather than an asset. She looked at Michael, who was still calmly talking to a frightened child while his mother received treatment, and knew they couldn't let bureaucracy destroy what they'd built. Just then, the elderly Spanish-speaking woman Sarah had treated earlier approached the nurse's station. In her hands, she clutched a worn notebook. Through tears, she explained that she had been documenting the health issues in her community for years, keeping track of who needed help but was too afraid to seek it. The notebook was filled with pages of names, stories, and unmet medical needs, a handwritten testament to why their program was so desperately needed. As Sarah translated the woman's words, she noticed several board members had stepped out of their emergency session to witness the scene. The CEO herself stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. But before anyone could speak, another ambulance siren wailed in the distance, and with it came news that would force everyone in that hospital to choose sides in the battle between traditional protocol and revolutionary change. The approaching ambulance carried someone who would change everything, the hospital board chairman's own mother, who had been visiting friends in the community when the accident occurred. As she was rushed in, disoriented and frightened, it was Michael who recognized her from church. Before anyone could stop him, he was at her side, holding her hand and speaking softly about their shared memories of Sunday services and community gatherings. The chairman stood frozen, watching as his mother, who had always been hesitant around medical staff, visibly relaxed at Michael's familiar presence. Sarah worked alongside them, her nursing expertise complemented perfectly by Michael's ability to keep his mother calm and cooperative. The barrier between hospital administration and community care dissolved in that powerful moment. In the midst of this scene, the elderly woman's notebook had made its way through the board members. The CEO, still standing in the doorway, began reading entries aloud. Stories of neighbors helping neighbors, of community members trying to care for each other in the absence of accessible health care. These weren't just statistics on a spreadsheet. They were real people, their neighbors, their community. Then the CEO did something unprecedented. She pulled out her phone and began recording. "I want to document this," she said, panning across the emergency room where medical staff and community members worked together seamlessly. "This is what healthcare should look like." She turned to Sarah and Michael, who were still tending to patients. "Your presentation in the boardroom was compelling, but this is undeniable proof." The chairman, still holding his mother's hand, cleared his throat. "The insurance payout from the community center," he said quietly, "it won't just fund a new program. I'll personally match it." His mother squeezed his hand, tears in her eyes. "It's what your father would have wanted," she whispered. "He always said that community was the best medicine." But the real surprise came when Lisa, who had been quietly working her phone during the crisis, stepped forward. She had reached out to her network of business contacts, and the story of what was happening at Metropolitan General had gone viral. Offers of support were pouring in from healthcare organizations across the country, all wanting to learn from and replicate their community-integrated approach. Sarah felt overwhelmed as she watched their simple idea transform into something much bigger than she had ever imagined. But it was Michael's grandson who provided the perfect culmination to the moment. He had been drawing again, and this time his picture showed the hospital and the community center as one building, with people of all colors holding hands around it. The CEO picked up the drawing and pinned it to the emergency room bulletin board. "This," she announced, "is our new blueprint." She turned to Sarah and Michael. "But we'll need you both to lead it, not as nurse and patient, but as equal partners in revolutionizing community health care." Just then, Michael's wife rushed in with unexpected news from the community center site. As they cleared the accident debris, they had discovered something in the damaged building's foundation, something that would add yet another extraordinary chapter to their already remarkable story. But that revelation would have to wait, because right now, in that emergency room, they were witnessing the birth of something powerful. A new kind of health care, built on trust, understanding, and the simple truth that sometimes the most important medicine isn't found in pills or procedures, but in the connections we forge with each other. As Sarah looked around at the scene, medical professionals and community members working side by side, barriers broken down, trust being built, she realized that this wasn't just a happy ending. It was a beginning, the first page of a new chapter in community health care. And as she caught Michael's eye across the room, they both knew that their journey was far from over. What they found in the community center's foundation was a time capsule from 1963, containing letters, photographs, and a detailed plan for a community health partnership, eerily similar to what Sarah and Michael had proposed. Among the documents was a photograph of Michael's mother in her nurse's uniform, standing proudly with a group of community leaders who had dreamed of bringing accessible health care to their neighborhood. Their vision, though ahead of its time, had never been realized, until now. 6 months later, the new Metropolitan Community Health Center opened its doors. The modern building stood as a testament to what can happen when barriers break down and communities come together. The entrance featured a wall-sized reproduction of Michael's grandson's drawing, now accompanied by the 1963 photograph, a powerful reminder of how dreams can echo across generations. Sarah and Michael's partnership became a model for healthcare institutions nationwide. Their program combined the best of both worlds: professional medical care and community-based support. Regular health screenings, educational programs, and a mobile clinic serving homebound residents helped bridge the healthcare gap that had existed for decades. The elderly Spanish-speaking woman's notebook became the foundation for a comprehensive community health database, helping identify and address specific neighborhood needs. She now led a team of community health advocates, teaching them the importance of cultural sensitivity and patient advocacy. Her documentation had evolved from a personal mission into a vital tool for understanding and serving the community. Lisa's business expertise proved invaluable as she helped develop a sustainable financial model that caught the attention of healthcare policymakers. The program's success challenged traditional healthcare delivery methods, proving that community integration wasn't just compassionate, it was cost-effective. But perhaps the most meaningful change was seen in the day-to-day interactions. The hospital's emergency room visits decreased as preventive care increased. Patients who had once been hesitant to seek medical help now had a trusted place to turn. The medical staff, including Dr. Thompson, reported higher job satisfaction as they formed deeper connections with the community they served. Michael's recovery progressed well, but he never really left the hospital. Instead, he became an integral part of the center's leadership team, his experience as both patient and community leader providing unique insights that proved invaluable. His grandson, now a regular visitor at the center, often declared his intention to become both a doctor and an artist, to help people and draw pictures that make them smile. Sarah continued her nursing duties, but her role evolved to include training other healthcare providers in community-centered care. The trust-building techniques she and Michael had developed became part of the hospital's standard training program. Their story became a case study in medical schools, highlighting the importance of cultural competency and community engagement in healthcare. 1 year after the accident that had changed everything, Sarah and Michael stood in front of a new group of healthcare providers and community leaders eager to learn from their experience. As they shared their story, Sarah glanced at the wall where both the childhood drawing and the 1963 photograph hung side by side. She realized that their success wasn't just about improving healthcare. It was about honoring the past while building a better future. The story of the white nurse and black patient whose unexpected connection transformed their community continues to inspire similar initiatives across the country. But for Sarah and Michael, it was never about making headlines or creating a model for others to follow. It was simply about seeing each other as people first, about recognizing that sometimes the greatest healing happens when we look beyond our differences and find our common humanity. Their story proved that real change doesn't always come from grand plans or big budgets. Sometimes it starts with a simple moment of kindness, a willingness to listen, and the courage to see beyond the barriers that divide us. In the end, they had created more than a healthcare center. They had built a bridge between communities, one human connection at a time.